but let me keep my introduction to Bill Aulet extremely short. I think you all know a lot about Bill. He is the managing director of the MIT Entrepreneurship Center. He's a professor of practice at the MIT Sloan School of Management. And, you know, if the saying goes, practice makes perfect, then I think Bill is really a perfect example of someone who straddles many worlds. He's been a professional athlete. He's worked in a very large corporate environment, the opposite of entrepreneurial, you might say. He has successfully started up and run several tech-based high-growth businesses. And for more than the last decade, he's been with us here at the MIT Sloan School, leading our educational efforts around how do we understand and teach entrepreneurship as a capability, as a skill set, as opposed to something that you're just born with. Today, Bill is going to talk with us about anti-fragile entrepreneurship, which is a theme that he has been really stepping up over the last several months as being even more relevant to the challenges that we're facing in the world at the moment. And we will have a chance, Bill will make a few opening remarks, and then we'll really get into a good discussion with Bill for the second half of this webinar. Bill also teaches, as I mentioned, not only in our degree programs, he teaches in executive education programs and has some well-known books out, which we'll share some information about as well later. But with that, I would like to hand over to Bill and ask you please to tell us, what is anti-fragile entrepreneurship? Why is it important? How do we do it? And where do we go from here?
Thank you so much, Peter. And it is fabulous to see so many of you out there. And I'm looking forward to this. But first, before I even start, let me say, you know, I hope all of you and your loved ones are healthy and happy. This pandemic and social unrest has created, you know, enormous pain. It is not something we ever would have wished, but I'm going to talk about, you know, what do we do now? What's next? It is what it is. What are we going to do next? But I don't want to belittle the pain and suffering that a lot of people have had. So hopefully you're healthy, you know, look out for your loved ones. This is serious stuff. So, you know, now that being said, when there's a crisis, if you're anti-fragile, crisis is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to shine. You know, the saying is, the darker the night, the brighter the stars shine. And so what I want to talk about is, you know, what we've learned since this crisis has started. And some of it is stuff we never would have thought about beforehand. But one thing we had talked about back in November, and we've talked about in EDP for a few years now, is, you know, entrepreneurship is about being anti-fragile. And by anti-fragile, we mean not just resilient. Fragile is when something happens and you don't expect it, you break. Resilient means I'm just going to keep going no matter what happens. And anti-fragile means that when there's a crisis, you get stronger. You actually get excited by it to see the opportunities. That doesn't mean you're not empathetic, but it just means not only do you not break, you get energized by it. If this window closes, you know what, there's another window, let's go get it right now. And I'm going to talk about how important that is and how this crisis has just brought that to the forefront. And I can give you tons of examples, but I just want to make 10 points to get things started. And then by 10:20, I want to kind of jump into questions. So I did have 24 points, but Peter said, you know, despite that being on brand, it's too long. So I'm going to just consolidate it to 10. First of all, the definition of entrepreneurship, I think used to be entrepreneurship equals startup. And we've been talking a lot about entrepreneurship equals this kind of anti-fragile capability. That is, you can handle adversity. You see opportunities where other people don't in amorphous things. You know how to operate where things aren't under control. There's a certain level of chaos. You don't have all the resources you need. And that is entrepreneurship. Startup is one kind of, you know, embodiment of that, and it is a pretty pure, pretty extreme one. But you can be an entrepreneur in a corporation, you can be an entrepreneur in a nonprofit, you can be an entrepreneur even in an academic institution, and you can be an entrepreneur in your personal life. And I want to just talk a little bit about that as well. And it's not just enough, as it's become clear, to be an anti-fragile individual. You have to think about how do you build anti-fragile teams and anti-fragile organizations. And ultimately, we as citizens of the world have to think about how do we build anti-fragile society. So first point is definition of entrepreneurship really has changed here in this crisis more so than ever. And that is incredibly important when you think about the point two. Point two is that there's a new law, and I'm going to call it Sue Siegel's law. And that law is that the world is never going to be slower than it is today. It's only going to get faster. And boy, just a while ago, we thought, how crazy is it? You know, Brexit, Donald Trump being elected. You know, these things are just being just accumulating on top of each other. And this pace of change is more and more rapid. And so that's why being anti-fragile is more important than ever. So when you think about the history of innovation, there have really been two drivers of that. Moore's law, you know, that the power of the chip increases, doubles every 18 months. And the second one is Metcalfe's law, where, you know, the network effects, the value of the network is exponentially related to the number of high quality nodes on it. These two laws have proven to be quite true, not precisely true, but they sent a mindset in people so that they understood what needs to be done. And that's why I believe that Siegel's law, that things will never be as slow as they are today. They're only going to get faster and faster. You're not going to be able to rest. You're not going to get a point. It's not going to go back to the good old times where, you know, you could just manage things. It's never going to be like that again. It's only going to get faster, and entrepreneurship is going to be more important. Third, when we think about management versus entrepreneurship, and we talked about this in EDP, management is optimizing existing organizations to give predictable results, to de-risk them, to make them more efficient. Management is important, but the dial on that is being turned down, and the dial on entrepreneurship, which is how do we create new opportunities in a rapidly changing world, that dial is turned up. So let me be clear, management has not gone away, but the importance of entrepreneurship in every single organization has just gone up. You cannot ignore what is happening with the pandemic. You cannot ignore what's happening otherwise. And this will only continue to be the case. Four, I would say the key factors in entrepreneurship being successful have become even more clear. We've talked about those, but in this hyper time of kind of time is sped up and entrepreneurship has had to react to that. It's very clear that first of all, you need diverse and good sense making. If you just had a tight band of people who are giving you input about what's going on in the world during this crisis, you were not going to see what was going on. And I give you examples in mind. There were some people kind of on the fringe, and they were saying, Bill, this is crazy. What's happening? And you're looking at the virality effects of this. A guy named Ed Baker, he was going, this is crazy. I'm like, you know, Ed, why? And that's not someone that I was talking to all the time. But by listening to him and by listening to Robbie Barbero telling me other stuff, all of a sudden I started to make, you know, could see the crisis coming. It is incredibly important. We always talk about entrepreneurs' prioritization. You need to prioritize things very, very quickly now. And it could be, so, you know, if you look at the Antifragile Speaker Series, which we have in the back here, and if we could put the link up there, Elaine, for the Antifragile Speaker Series, I would encourage you all to see that. The first talk in that speaker series was a guy named Jocko Willink. And some of you probably know Jocko Willink. He's a New York Times best-selling, #1 bestseller, and his podcast got like 2 million downloads. And he was literally in crisis of firefights in Ramadi, you know, where he was a Navy SEAL. And one of his people injured over here gets shot. People are incoming fire. His communication systems, he's lost touch with the platoon.
So you've got all these problems going on. And what's the lesson that you learn? How do you deal with that? You have to focus, figure out what's the most important thing, and start moving in that direction, but not all committed to. You have to make small steps in that direction to start to show progress. So the importance of prioritization. The next point I would make is four key factors in entrepreneurship. We heard from Mark Randolph, one of the co-founders, original CEO of Netflix. He said, nobody knows anything. In this crisis, anyone who told you they know what was going on, they didn't. It just kept changing, It seemed like Bernie Sanders was going to be president. Then, everything changed, on a regular basis. And here's the point, is that you have to be able to make hypothesis and very rapidly test hypothesis in a crisis, because nobody knows what's going to happen and it will change very, very rapidly. And that goes to kind of the fourth point I want to make out of this is you need to act. You can't just sit and think about things. You need to act in a crisis. And it's interesting. One of the comments someone gave me was, in peacetime priorities, it's strategy first, people second, and execution third. In wartime, the priorities are execution, getting good people, and figuring out a strategy. It's the inverse of those things when you're in the midst of a crisis. It's all about executing and not trying to, you're figuring out your strategy in a more fluid way. So it's act, react, and react very rapidly with fast clock speed. And I think the other thing that was really clear in this leadership in this time was the importance in entrepreneurship of good leadership, of just saying, here's our message, here's the things we're going to do. We stay calm and we say that, there's 3 or 4 things we're going to do. And when you look at the Antifragile Speaker Series, which was very important to our students, it was 4 things. It was, we're going to give you hope, we're going to give you strength, we're going to give you guidance, and we're going to give you community. And we reinforce that every day with them, and twice a week on that speaker series, as you'll see when you go through it. So as a leader, you have to come up with a concise message, and then you have to execute against that and stay consistent with it and communicate it. And and I just talked to you about the importance of execution when you're in a crisis. You can't sit around and strategize. You've got to execute. You got to have the spirit of a Navy SEAL. The spirit of a pirate, but you got to have the execution skills of a Navy SEAL. And if you don't execute quickly and with discipline, boy, you're going to have a really hard time. And the last part, in a crisis, much like entrepreneurship, it's a mental game. You have to look at it as a positive thing. You can't let the anxiety overcome you. You have to say, all right, we never would have wished for this pandemic, but you know what? There's opportunities. Everyone who was strong before is not strong now, and I have as good a chance as anybody. The playing field has just been leveled. I can really make a difference. I'm going to have to pick up the pace here. The fifth one is the fourth crisis. And Brad Feld talks about this in the speaker series. We had a healthcare crisis. That led to a humanitarian crisis. That led to an economic crisis. But the other crisis that people aren't talking about is a mental health crisis of people being able to just keep hope, to stay strong in this. And that's really, really important. And we talk about that in the speaker series, and I would encourage you to take a look at that. As you think about this, point 6, whenever you're doing this, you can't just say, I love a crisis, to people who are having pain. You have to start with the empathy like I did with this, and then say, let's get to the next play. We never would have wished for a pandemic. We never would have wished for, social unrest, racial injustice, but it is what it is. Now, how are we going to fix it? And this is the great coach in basketball, Mike Krzyzewski of Duke University. He always yells at his players when something happens, next play, because you can't focus on what happened in the past. You got to focus on what's coming next. So we start with empathy, but get to next play. I think one interesting thing here, which is very encouraging, as we talk about raison d'etre, why you should have a good company. The research shows that you should have a purpose for your company. It shouldn't just be about money. Well, if that hasn't become clear to you right now, people who are trying to be profiteering off this crisis got crushed. In the United States, people who bought, tried to stack up masks and other things and then tried to sell them, they got crushed on social media. You have to come at this with a purpose, with a mission. And it's really good to see that. Our research has showed companies that have a purpose end up doing better because their employees want to stick with them, and they stick with them in the ups and the downs. But also the market now wants to see companies with a purpose. They've said that before, but you've never seen as active a consumer market to fight back against profiteering as opposed to building a great company. Number 8 is the Stockdale Paradox, and this is what was talked about in Good to Great. Admiral Stockdale survived in North Vietnam, a prisoner of war. And the people in the prisoner of war who were prisoners of war who didn't make it were the people who said, hey, let's give people hope, and we're going to get out on Christmas. Just hold on till Christmas. But what happens is when you give people that hope with a time frame on it, and then Christmas happens and they don't get out, those people tend to just lose it, and they did not make it. But if you say, look, we are going to succeed. We don't know when, but we are going to succeed in time. We are going to get to the other side. That's the attitude you have to have. You can't put a time limit on this because it's not going to end quickly. I'm telling you right now, if you think it's going to end by the end of 2020, you are wrong. It is going to last longer and the ramifications. But we're going to survive, and we are going to be better when it's all done. We are going to build it back better. And that's the attitude you have to have without trying to put artificial deadlines on it. Number 9, as I say, Boise, Idaho is looking a lot better today than it did 100 days ago. Geography matters less than it did in the past. We are all connected right now, 2,000 of us or whatever it is. It's extraordinary. It's not, the technology advanced some, but the technology was always there. But it's the social norms to accept it. And lastly, let me just say that it's mindset, skill set, and way of doing business. All these things are what make you successful in a crisis. And that's precisely what entrepreneurship is about. It's the spirit of a pirate. It's the execution skills, knowing the knowledge of a Navy SEAL. And it's also the ability to work in communities very, very effectively to pursue opportunities with resources beyond your control. So with that, Peter, I will turn it over to you. And have we gotten any response from this illustrious crew out here?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. There have been just a flood of comments and questions coming in, which we're trying to track. But let me just start with a couple of themes that I've seen coming through. One, you mentioned at the outset, and people really resonated with these entrepreneurial ideas you're talking about aren't really just the confine of startups. So are you seeing any great examples that actually this time corporate and large organizational culture is changing? Or if someone's inside one of those organizations, what's your advice to them to get going?
Well, let me give you a very specific one, Peter, that you know well, and everybody here. If you want a large organization that has a lot of inertia in it, look at an academic institution. Look at MIT. And people liked us before, but now they're looking to us for leadership, to do anti-fragile speaker series, to run new courses, to help students online, to how do we respond to Black Lives Matter? Because we have this entrepreneurial skill. So I can tell you at our center, we have never worked harder than we are right now. We have never worked more productively, and we have never been more valued by that large organization of MIT. And I could get into some of the tactics. Some of the tactics are having daily stand-ups. So why is that? To have very fast clock speed, to get good sense making and to respond to it, to execute with small steps into it. We prioritize quickly and we take a step. There's steps we've taken which haven't worked. But that would be the most clear one that I could go into great detail on, Peter. And but we're getting lots of inquiries from other people. The entrepreneurial organizations are looking at as being saviors for them to how do they come up with solutions to this new pandemic challenge, crisis.
Right, and that's helpful. And there have been some questions about different industries and sectors. Are you seeing that there are particular industries and sectors that are more affected, or more amenable, where there are more opportunities, or is this more across the board? Any advice where people should be looking?
Well, let me just say what we have learned is that there are opportunities in every industry, but industries, the one key thing you need to do is, it's not that offline is gone away forever, but online has just become much more important. Digitization is more important. Companies that depended on stores, on kind of people coming to them in person, and they were all in with that, those companies are getting killed. The ones who have a digitization aspect of it, where you can order their products online, they have a direct connection with the customer, those companies are exploding. So if you're a gym where you're dependent on residential stuff and you haven't digitized it, you're in trouble. If you provide on-home networked exercise equipment, you're booming. You know, if you're doing delivery services, if you're doing e-commerce, but if you're retail, boy, you're having a hard time.
Interesting you picked on retail as the last point. One of the questions was if, you know, Amazon really came into its own, particularly in the United States for a while, but interestingly, the quick deliveries that we all got used to are now taking much longer, and other traditional players are sort of moving into the space as well. Walmart, Target just announced. Do you think that even some of the currently very successful tech-driven companies are going to face really big challenges from both new entrants, but also from existing players?
So look, it's a really good point, Peter. The retailers like Brooks Brothers and the other ones who doubled down on just trying to be more efficient and on the offline, they are bankrupt. When you look at that, they're basically the J. But the ones who invested, the Targets, the Walmarts, they are actually picking up, because even with Amazon, there was so much demand for the digitization, the e-commerce stuff, that they picked up that excess stuff. But the ones who didn't invest in that, who didn't have those entrepreneurial groups trying out these new ideas, those innovation groups, they essentially are going bankrupt. So you got to have that group inside your organization to be able to do it. But let me tell you, do not bet against Amazon, my friends. Do not bet against Amazon. Jeff Bezos and his team, no one has a faster clock speed.
Yeah, that's clearly the ability to adapt to change and to innovate is something that you're really advocating here. But let's turn maybe to the last question or two to the people issues, where I think there's sort of a bit of a cognitive dissonance for many of us. I think in our hearts agree with your point that, you know, being human-centric and having empathy and all those things are important. And yet, when we look at the most successful sort of entrepreneurs, particularly in the tech sector and finance sector and other places, human skills and empathy are not necessarily what we would associate with the leaders of those organizations. And, you know, what's your comment about that?
I think that is I understand when you look at the Hollywood perception of entrepreneurship, of Mark Zuckerberg and the social network and Steve Jobs and that, you got to understand that is not what the research shows. The research shows that leaders who are empathetic, leaders who build teams, are much better than the mercurial individual who is not empathetic. And I'll just give you one data point, which is in our world. Our Delta V accelerator, the teams in the Delta V accelerator, they're succeeding at a rate of 75%. Well, success, which is not, this is just a proxy for success, is they're still in business at 75%. And I'm going to make a comment here that can be accused of gender bias, but we looked at the number, the success rate. That was all of the Delta V companies. The success rate with female CEOs was 90%. So that means when you take them out of the 75%, you're probably closer to 60. And then you have the CEOs who are female who are 90%. That's a difference of 30 points. They are 30 points. And it's presumptuous to say that, you know, women have a higher empathy than men, but let's face it, it's kind of true. And that situation you're seeing over and over again. So the research shows that entrepreneurship is a team sport. If you try to make yourself the show, you've got it all wrong. It's not about you. It's about your customer and it's about your team. Individuals don't get anything meaningful done in the world generally. It's teams, it's organizations that get things done. Do we have time for any more?
Well, almost. Maybe if there's a quick answer to just building on that theme that you're answering there, what is in your opinion, the role of diversity and inclusion and inclusiveness in this sort of style of entrepreneurial management? How does that work?
So first of all, that's one of our fundamental beliefs, and diversity, inclusion is what entrepreneurship is. It is a level playing field. Nobody cares who your mommy and daddy are. And it's been shown over and over again that teams with diverse perspectives, diverse skill sets, succeed more than homogeneous teams. You can look at Noam Wasserman's work, Matt Marx's work. So having diverse teams isn't just a morally good thing to do, it's an economically good thing to do. And so we believe, I mean, when you look at the success rate of immigrants for starting companies as one proxy for entrepreneurship, it's much higher than people who are not. Look, the hungry dog hunts best. Comfort is not a good thing for innovation. A lack of comfort is better. And so if people seek comfort, they're seeking homogeneity, non-diversity. When you're getting diversity, it creates this tension, this creative tension. And that's where you get the hybrid vigor, which gives you these new great opportunities. And that's what we need today. The problems that we're facing are getting more and more difficult. And those are not going to be solved by the traditional ways of large corporations with incremental thinking. It's not management, it's entrepreneurship that's going to address these.
Great, thank you, Bill. That seems like a very powerful note to end on, and we're right out of time, so that's perfect timing as well. Bill Aulet,
greetings to everybody. And I wish I could see you all.
We could go on for hours, but unfortunately we're out of time. But hopefully many of you will be able to join us next week for a really exciting follow-up on fast-tracking innovation, featuring our own Ben Shields and a guest, Yet Ganga Kumaran from Formula One Racing. That's promising to be a very fascinating webinar as well. But for now, once again, Bill Aulet, thank you very much. As always, this was a pleasure, and I learned a lot from listening to you and talking with you. I know everyone out there did too. Thank you all for joining us and for participating so actively in the chat and the questions. Please do keep, we sent the link, we'll send it again in the chat in a second, to the Antifragility Speaker Series that Bill referenced several times. And keep in touch, keep checking us out on the MIT website. We're all in this together, and we're going to solve it together. Thanks, everyone.
Stay healthy. Stay healthy, everybody.